Imagine this. You are standing in the great hall of a Persian palace. The air is heavy with incense. Golden lamps cast soft light on walls carved with the faces of kings. At first sight, it feels like paradise. Wealth, beauty, and power all gathered in one place. But look closer, the shadows are hiding a secret for most people, even whisper. Most people know the Persian Empire as a place of brilliance. They talk about stunning architecture like Persepolis and mighty kings who ruled vast lands and a system of roads and governance that connected millions of people. It was one of the greatest civilizations of its time, admired even by its enemies. Yet beneath the polished stone and glittering treasures, the empire hid a dark reality that was far more disturbing. Behind closed doors, sexual relations became weapons of power. They were not simply private satisfactions, but systems of domination, acts meant to control, humiliate, and break people into obedience. For the victims, as we walk deeper into this story, keep in mind, history often shines light on the victories of kings, but rarely on the suffering of the powerless. The Persian Empire was one of the largest and most powerful in the ancient world. Stretching across 3 continents, it connected lands as far apart as Egypt, India, and Greece. Its rulers commanded immense armies, built vast cities, and created a system of governance so advanced that even its enemies copied it. To stand in its capital was to see a civilization at the height of its golden halls, towering columns, and courtyards where every detail reminded visitors of royal strength. But the palace was more than a symbol of wealth. It was the heartbeat of the empire. Here, politics and pleasure were woven tightly together. Royal banquets displayed not only just food and drink, but the king's ability to control abundance. Among the most guarded spaces of the court was the harem. For outsiders, it was often imagined as a paradise of beauty. In reality, it was part of the machinery of rule. Women were brought from distant provinces, sometimes as tributes from defeated kings and sometimes as captives torn from their homes. Their role was not only to serve the desires of the ruler, but also to cement loyalty and intimidate rivals. What appeared as romance was in truth a cage. Behind those golden doors, intimacy was controlled, arranged, and politicized. For many women, the journey into the Persian harem began with loss. They were taken from distant provinces, some the daughters of nobles and others simple village girls, caught in the tide of conquest. Families were torn apart in a single moment, and the young were carried far from everything they had ever known. To their captors, they were not daughters or sisters anymore. They were treasures, gifts, and tools of the empire. Inside the harem, the surface glimmered with wealth. Rooms were filled with silk draperies, soft cushions, and the perfume of rare oils. Jewels sparkled under torchlight, and attendants moved silently, serving food and drink of the finest kind. For an outsider, it could look like paradise. But for the women living there, it was a prison without chains. Loneliness became their constant companion. They were surrounded by rivals rather than friends. Each woman was aware that her place depended on pleasing a single man. Smiles were forced, the words were measured, and mistakes were punished. The king, admired by his people as a father of the empire, revealed a different face in the harem. In public, he ruled with speeches and decrees, but in his private life, he ruled with desire. For the women, his word was law. There was no choice, no refusal, only obedience. The Persian court did not treat sexuality as private passion. It treated it as ritual, control, and punishment. One of the most chilling traditions was the forced initiation of young captives. Girls, sometimes no more than children, were taken from their homelands and prepared for the king or his nobles. Ancient writers like Herodotus wrote, the way these women were trained in beauty, dance, and obedience. But beneath the training lay something darker, ritualized first encounters that were less about intimacy and more about domination. These initiations marked the loss of childhood in a single night, transforming daughters into possessions of empire. The system reached beyond women. Eunuchs, boys taken from their families and mutilated, so they could never reproduce, were forced into royal service. Some guarded the harems, living lives of isolation, trapped between the world of men and women, stripped of identity and future. Others were used as servants for the most intimate, humiliating tasks. The empire praised their loyalty, but that loyalty had been carved into their flesh. Their suffering was the price of the king's security. Punishment also carried a sexual edge. Women accused of disloyalty or infidelity faced not only execution, but public humiliation. Chronicles describe women paraded naked, shamed before crowds, or subjected to degrading acts before their deaths. Their supposed crime was often nothing more than falling out of favor or being accused by a jealous rival. These punishments were designed to remind every woman in the harem and every noble who watched that intimacy with the king was not privilege but a sentence of silence. Plutarch wrote about Persian rulers who saw their desires as divine rights. The chronicles tell us the same story from another angle, but those desires left behind trails of broken lives. For the victims, each practice was not a distant ritual, but a personal horror lived in silence and fear. It is easy to imagine monsters. Behind these acts, men born with cruelty in their hearts. But the truth is more unsettling. Many of the perpetrators looked ordinary. They were nobles dressed in fine robes, soldiers carrying the king's banner, or servants who bowed humbly in the palace halls. To their families, they might have seemed loyal fathers, dutiful sons, or faithful friends. Yet inside the court's walls, the empire taught them to abandon compassion. The system itself shaped them. To serve the king meant to serve his every desire, no matter how degrading. Soldiers were ordered to capture young girls as war spoils. Nobles were rewarded for bringing gifts of beauty to the court. Servants were told their silence was a sign of loyalty. Over time, what should have felt shameful became routine. Acts of cruelty were disguised as duty, and duty became a shield against guilt. Cruelty was not born in them, it was normalized around them. When a woman was paraded in humiliation, the men who stood watching did not protest. When a boy was cut and turned into a eunuch, those with the knife told themselves it was necessary. Every silence protected the guilty, and every obedient nod allowed another life to be broken. The horrors of the Persian court may seem distant and locked away in the dust of history. But when we look closer, the patterns are not gone, they repeat in new forms. The tools of domination used in those golden palaces still echo in our world today. Sexual exploitation as a weapon of control remains with us. In modern war zones, women are still taken as trophies, their bodies turned into battlegrounds to humiliate enemies and enforce silence. The trafficking of young girls across borders shows the same cruelty that tore daughters from their families centuries ago, and in the politics and business world, we continue to see how those in power sometimes twist intimacy into a form of control, demanding loyalty in exchange for protection or advancement. The lesson is bitter but clear. When power goes unchecked, the most vulnerable are the first to suffer. What the Persians practiced inside their palaces was not unique. It was part of a human pattern of abuse that stretches across centuries. Recognizing it in the past helps us see it in the present. The Persian Empire has long since fallen. Its palaces lie in ruins, its kings remembered in stone carvings and fading chronicles. But the victims, the girls stolen from their homes, the boys turned into eunuchs, the women silenced by fear, remain nameless, their stories buried under centuries of silence. Today we speak their names not as individuals but as voices joined together. They remind us that the greatness of an empire is not measured by its monuments, but by how it treats its most vulnerable. If this story seems good to you, share it. Because silence protects abusers, but truth gives dignity back. May remembering Their pain help us build a world where no empire, no leader, and no system can strip away the humanity of the powerless again.